Coming up on Main Street, we're taking you on a trip through time, where history lives, an artist struggles, and the past lingers. Join us for Main Street, Trips Through Time.
Funding for Main Street was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you who support quality programs such as Main Street that appear only on public television.
Hello and welcome to Main Street. I'm Barbara Deeb. On this edition of our program, we're going to bring you the people and the places that echo the rich history of our Commonwealth and our country. We're here at the historic Riverview at Hobson Grove in Bowling Green as we begin our journeys through time. Our first outing takes us to the Frazier History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, where the past lives on in the guise of live interpreters at the museum. These interpretations bring real people to life and open history to audiences in a whole new way. Then we'll take a look at John James Audubon, who's known as an artist, but there's more to the man than just his work. The people at the John James Audubon State Park celebrate his life and his work through the museum dedicated to his memory. A trip to the Seelbach Hilton Hotel in Louisville rounds out our journey through time with a chat with hotel historian Larry Johnson. He'll let us in on stories about F. Scott Fitzgerald, Al Capone, and the unique design of the century-old hotel. We're on a trip through time on this edition of Main Street. No ticket required.
What this museum is able to do through the arms and armor that we have is tell the story of conflict and how the people, it's not just the pieces that we have in the museum, but it's the people behind it. And so we are able to tell those stories in a way where when people come to the museum, they don't necessarily all have to go in there and go, okay, what's this all about? They can actually very easily find out what it is about. And they're able to see the chronological order of the technology, the artistry, the craftsmanship, and and essentially how we got here today.
What is really special about the museum is that it's only 10 years old. And when you think of a history museum, you think of an institution that's probably been collecting for 100 years. But when you think about a new history museum, which almost seems like those two words don't go together, what you're looking at is a museum that can be very selective as to the stories that it tells and the objects that it uses to tell them. And that really gives us the possibility of not saying, oh, but this is how we always did this, because there really is no always. It gives us a chance to be a museum for the 21st century and to think about what is a history museum doing in the 21st century and how can it contribute.
Now the Yankees was plainly visible all up the hillside. You could count the number of their regiments by counting their flags. We could see their cannons. Their huge war dogs frowning down upon us, ready at any moment to belch forth their fire and smoke.
You see a lot of museums doing historic interpretations, maybe not on the scale that we're able to do it. I mean, you see a lot of museums, they might only have a certain amount of time. We, of course, can go back 1,000 years just with what we have. Actually, what we have now goes all the way back 2,500 years. It goes back to the Battle of Marathon. And we have 2,500 years of history that we're able to tell, and there are so many stories. Now, what we try to do is to tell stories, yes, of people that are well known. I'll throw out Molly Pitcher, but the thing is that we don't try to reenact it, because we aren't those people. The only thing we can do, we can't recreate it. We can only interpret. We interpret our history. And what we're able to do is to bring it to our patrons in a way that is dynamic, and they're able to, hold pieces that are reproductions that are as historically accurate as we can possibly get them, even down to the clothing. We do our best to make it tactile and to make it immediate.
7,742 glass balls launched from a trap in 9 hours. I think that demonstrated pretty successfully that was up to the challenge.
Well, I think our historic interpretations are important because they do look often not just at famous individuals, which is what you might expect, but they look at secondary characters. The guide who helped Teddy Roosevelt, the person who was the wife of the guy who was the cannoneer in the American Revolution. Like, how did regular lives work? I mean, we don't do children much for obvious reasons, but we can show children how ordinary people dealt with what seemed like these massive things in history.
I think what our strength is the fact that we tell the stories behind what you see in the museum. A lot of times you go to museums and you see something behind the glass and it's all very good, but you don't really get a sense of the person who might have held it. And especially with the Frazier collection, every piece in it has a provenance. And that's what makes it incredibly special, is that it's just not one of 20,000 pieces. It is one of 20,000 that might have an incredible story about it. And I think that's the strength, is that we tell the stories behind and of the people and of the events which they were part of. I think that we learn from conflict. We are still dealing with the ramifications of the American Civil War today. It's not ancient history. Yes, it might have happened 130 years ago, but we are still dealing with it. If you go to the South, it's still very prevalent. The civil rights movement, getting up into the equal rights movement of the women and the suffrage of the late 19th century and the early 20th century, it's still happening today. So I think that's what, we go back so we can learn from the past, as it says to paraphrase Mr. Frazier, we learn from our past, see where we are in the present, and how we can be better in the future. That's why I think that we should always remember. You should never forget where you come from and what made you. That's something as we're able to, throughout the museum, is be able to tell the stories in such a way that people can see history through clear eyes.
Audubon makes a lasting impression on people and seems to always have done so. There were individuals here in Henderson whose families knew Audubon, individuals that he worked with, that dealt with him in his store. They remembered and passed stories on about Audubon long after he was gone from Kentucky, and even after his death in 1851. I can talk to my own self, as I grew up near his Pennsylvania home and spent my many happy hours as a child running through the woods there and learning about the birds and observing nature. Well, we were very fortunate. One lady was really taken up with Audubon and just loved the stories that she heard from her grandparents that had known Audubon in those early days. And her name was Susan Tolles. Susan decided that something needed to be done for Audubon here in Henderson, and she began asking people for items, things that they might have relating to Audubon, began collecting things, and began to pursue the idea of a museum here of Audubon here in Henderson, where he had happily lived for 9 years. And over the past 75 years, Susan Tolles' dream of a museum here in Henderson for Audubon has continued to grow until it's the largest collection of Audubon paintings, prints, and artifacts anywhere in the country. Everyone in Kentucky needs to come and visit the museum. It's part of our history, both natural history and the history of our nation. John Audubon was born in Santo Domingo in 1885. He was an illegitimate child. His father was a French sea captain. His mother was a French peasant girl working on one of the plantations there. She died shortly after his birth, and Captain Audubon took John, as well as a half-sister, back to France with him. John was raised in France. John was pretty much allowed to pursue his own interests throughout his early childhood, and he was much interested in wildlife, nature, and art, and his stepmother allowed him to do whatever he really wanted to do. He came here to make a living, simply out of his love for a young lady. He would have been happy just to do nothing else but paint birds all his life from early on, but he recognized he needed to make a living. He saw the Kentucky frontier at the time as a place where he could establish himself and possibly make a fortune. There was money to be made, on the frontier. Audubon set the tone for all wildlife art that came after him. He wanted to show how things actually lived. His early drawings were in the scientific style of the time, the stiff portraits of the birds. From that you could identify the bird, but it didn't tell the story of the bird. Audubon would observe, he would watch, and he would often spend hours observing birds before he would attempt to obtain a specimen from which he would draw from. And if you're going to show the birds close up with the magnificent detail that he puts into his work, you have to have a specimen or something before you. These creatures are so unique. They're so wonderful in what they do and what their place is in the environment and in the world we live in. And that's what he wanted to show people. He wanted to show how they interact with each other, what their place is in nature. And Audubon accomplished this in his drawings like no one before him. This backwoodsman, as they referred to him, from Kentucky, showing up with these enormous paintings of birds in a non-traditional circumstance. Audubon shows up with these incredible paintings of these lifelike birds and habitats, and it was just breaking the tradition that everyone was familiar with. So they used this as an excuse that he really didn't know his art and didn't know anything about the birds to sort of push for a boycott of him, that no publisher would consider touching these works in Philadelphia. So Audubon packed up in 1826, went to England, where they exhibited his work, and people just raved about him. Within a short period of time, Audubon had become sort of the equivalent of today's rock star. England and Europe were taking in everything they could about America, American sort of mentality of adventure and frontier feeling about things. And Audubon shows that in his paintings. You get a feel for how things really are in America. He portrayed an America that was passing, as we see just nature in the early drawings, but then we begin to see buildings in the background. You see plantations, you see little towns, you see the forest being cut down. So he was showing what is taking place in the country as well. And people wanted to see this, they wanted to learn about it and hear what was new from America. And so he sold his paintings on that base, or sold the image of the frontier of America through his paintings as well. And sold himself as well. I mean, he passed himself off as the American woodsman, and he was promoting himself as an individual of the forest of America. And people wanted to see this, and that helped him sell his paintings and the image of himself. And that image lives on today. America was his country, and he would tell tales that that he was actually born in America, and he came back to his natal country, and this was where he actually belonged. And he became a true American in the sense of the word. Embraced our nation and everything it meant.
There's two brothers, Louis and Otto Seelbach. The family moved from Germany in 1865. They settled in Cincinnati. And Louis came to Louisville in 1869 and actually went to work at the original Galt House. Then in 1902, the brothers purchased this piece of property, started construction in 1903, and opened a 150-room hotel in 1905. Then extended it to a 500-room hotel by 1908. It's a French Renaissance. And when they opened, when the brothers built the hotel, they wanted the finest of everything. And the lobby shows how much they wanted the best. They got marble from Italy, France, Germany. They've got the chandeliers, like I say, came from the Phoenix. The original marble floor came from Vermont. It had to be replaced in 1981 with a marble floor from Alabama. The linens came from Ireland. The china came from France. So they wanted the best, and they got the best for everything. And you can just walk around the hotel and see the German architecture throughout the hotel, whether it be in the hallways or in the lobby or in the Rathskeller. And it's just a great place to come and visit and actually work. It's a love affair. I always refer to her as the fine old lady, the majestic lady. I just always have referred to the building as a her.
Larry Johnson is the hotel's historian and concierge and has some fascinating stories about this historic hotel.
Well, this room that we're in was the gentleman's poker room when the Oak Room was the gentleman's billiards club, which is what it was back in the early days. And there were stories told about this poker room that Al Capone loved to play cards here. And if there was a poker game going on and the police come in downstairs, there was a button somewhere in the lobby, and they would somebody would push the button, and the doors directly behind me would automatically close. They were spring-loaded, and that told everybody to get their money off the table. Now, there was a bellman that came to work here the same day I did in 1982. The only difference was he was 82 years old in 1982. And he told us stories that Al Capone would come to the hotel in the 20s, and he would escort him up to this room to play cards. Well, if Al was in here playing cards and those doors were shut, he wouldn't have waited for the police. He would have went through this door directly behind me, which led to a stairwell that went straight down by the Rathskeller. He'd run through the Rathskeller, and he could go to his right and go to the 5-foot concrete sewer pipes that went underneath the city, or he'd go to his left in the Rathskeller, and he would come to a tunnel that was made out of creek stone, just like you see in movies, and he could go to all the major buildings downtown. Now, whether Al was ever here or not, it's good folklore. We think he was. And then other things that you want to see, the lobby with all of its mystique with the marble and the murals. The murals were painted by Arthur Thomas right around 1906. And they can't be taken down. They're painted on plaster, which Sheridan found out when they broke one of them. And then the chandeliers, they have their own story. They came from a hotel in Lexington called the Phoenix Hotel. Garvis Kincaid owned it. And now if you go to Lexington, where the Kincaid Towers is where the Phoenix set. And we didn't know this until several years after we'd been reopened, that the proprietor of the Phoenix was Charles Seelbach, who was Otto and Louis Seelbach's younger brother. So the lobby is sort of like a family get-together. And then if you go upstairs to the 10th floor, you'll come to the Grand Ballroom, which was a rooftop garden in the early days. And then around 1910 to 1912, the brothers put a roof over the top of it and called it the ballroom. And then in 1918, there was a young gentleman stationed at Camp Taylor, and he would visit the Rathskeller, which is where the USO was. And on several occasions, they would have to ask him to leave because he was a drunk. In 1925, after he had gotten out of the service, he moved to Paris, France, and became a journalist, and he came out with a book called The Great Gatsby. And in chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby, he refers to Tom and Daisy having their wedding reception in the Grand Ballroom at the Seelbach Hotel. Now, that being said, you need to go down and see the Rathskeller, which we think is the largest collection of Rookwood pottery in the world. And again, it was the USO during World War I. It's the room that F. Scott was kicked out of. And you can walk around the room, and around the columns you'll see pelicans. The pelicans was a symbol of luck. Somebody told Louis Seelbach about this, and he was a type of person that believed in every lucky charm he could get. And then on the walls you'll see different village scenes. Those are villages around Frankenthal, Germany. And in one area on the left wall, after you go in, there's what we call the Romeo and Juliet balcony. And there's this balcony with these glass windows, and the glass and these windows are original Tiffany glass windows. And it was the manager of the Rathskeller's office. He could open the windows and watch his people work back in the early days.
Johnson has been at the Seelbach for over 30 years, and he loves to share his passion for the hotel with everyone he meets.
The love of people. I love talking to people. I love being around people. The building is just mystique. You never know from day to day who or what you're going to be involved with. I do a lot of historic ghost tours to different people. Anything from high schools to grade schools to senior citizens. I go out and do talks to different organizations. So I just never get bored with it. It's not an assembly line job. It's something that I kind of do at my own pace. I work in the concierge lounge in the mornings, and I get to see people when they get up in the morning and come in and have their breakfast, and the biggest majority of them know me by first name. So it's sort of like, in a way, I agree with my daughter. I've got another family, and I see them almost every morning. Once you get here, you get hooked and you stay.
Well, we've come to the end of our journey, but we hope that you've enjoyed these trips through time as we've brought you stories about the Frazier History Museum in Louisville, where the past comes alive through the interpretations and stories about common people in extraordinary circumstances. We found out about the life and talent of John James Audubon through the museum dedicated to him in Henderson, Kentucky. Then we ventured into the stories of the century-old Seelbach Hilton Hotel in Louisville, with historian Larry Johnson and his tales of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Al Capone. And of course, we'd like to thank our friends here at Riverview at Hobson Grove in Bowling Green for hosting this edition of our program. And don't forget, our producers would love to hear from you. We welcome any questions, comments, or story ideas. Check out our webpage at the address on your screen. Here you can find archived editions of Main Street as well. Until next time, I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. And remember, we're just around the corner on Main Street.